Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder we're having a look at Lanovski's P-47M-1-RE, and this was posted to the War Thunder Reddit by Cavalry, and he was able to data mine us in the files. Now, what is this aircraft? Well, if you're familiar with the P-47M-1-RE, it is a premium. It's actually Bostwick's P-47M. And now we seem to have a Polish version which is coming to the game. Now it isn't officially in the game yet, but the idea is it's probably going to be here in the next few days, and I kind of agree with this, because the 100th anniversary of the independence of Poland is coming up on the 11th of November, so pretty much in 3 days. My guess is this aircraft is going to be available over the weekend as a celebration for that. Now, I have done a lot of work trying to work out who Lanovski is, how it relates to the P-47M, and all of this, because generally when you have a look at the Polish Air Force, or you think about them in World War II, they're very much, British orientated, and also Hurricane and Spitfire orientated. At least a lot of the history is, and to be honest, it's really interesting to read about. You have some very, very powerful squadrons which fought for Britain in World War II. Basically, you have the 300, the 301, the 302, and the 303, all flying Hawker Hurricanes, and then later on, you have the Spitfire boys, and also even flying stuff like Mustangs, and then you have the bomber squadrons, a lot of them placed in places like Yorkshire, and for me, there's a lot of history there, which is really interesting, and what is always brought up, which I think is correct to bring up, is their fighting in the Battle of Britain. Though it was controversial at the time for many reasons, Hugh Dowding, one of my favourite, I suppose, commanders, you'd call them in history, saying that he didn't like the fact that they struggled with communications, and it wasn't exactly great to have a ton of different languages on the airwaves while people were, in their planes, also talking about how the training was different to the RAF, so they would have to retrain. But once they proved they were useful, and proved that they were incredibly good pilots who had actually also fought the Luftwaffe before a lot of the British pilots did, they were put into action and did incredibly well. Far outperformed what many thought they would, and therefore should be commended for this. So, to be quite honest, it's kind of weird seeing a P-47 instead of something like a Hurricane. But let's go through where Lanovski comes from and where the P-47 comes from. So we'll start off with the aircraft, just because, well, I suppose it's kind of easier. So, the P-47M, where does it come from? Well, first of all, we have to start the story with the XP-47J. This was an incredibly high-performance version of what would hopefully eventually become a P-47. Unfortunately, this wasn't really the case. So, in the early 1940s to 1942, 1943, they created this thing called the XP-47J. It was designed to kill Focke-Wulf 190s, and let's just say they went a little bit overboard. It was an incredibly powerful fighter when it came to its engine, when it came to how it flew. We don't have it in game yet, but I'm sure one day we will. Now, what came of the XP-47J is, even though it had an incredible performance, it was only really seen as a technology demonstrator, showing how powerful of an engine they can use, showing kind of a test bed of, yes, we can do this. So the XP-47J coming to game would be a little bit odd, but I think it could be possible. Now, on top of this, we have another plane, the P-47C. Now, the P-47C was a little bit larger than your typical Thunderbolt. It had a good engine, but not as good as some of the variants that we see in games, such as the N. And what they did was they took a P-47C, installed an R2800 C-Series in it, and made it incredibly strong. So they basically took the XP-47J's engine and stuck it in a P-47C. And what this meant was, well, the reason they did this is it would make it easier to manufacture, and therefore they wouldn't need a lot of changes to the current C aircraft, so they wouldn't have to build a completely new aircraft. They could take an existing airframe, stick this amazing engine that they've made, and, Bob's your uncle. So, with that said, they made this aircraft, and they gave it the in-house designation of the XP-47M. Now, what this is it's just a name given to, the development program, so nothing to really worry about. And it actually performed incredibly well. And it was able to be one of the fastest aircraft that, at its time, 488 miles per hour was obtained in at least one of the tests. And even on top of this, there were pilots reporting that they could hit 500 miles an hour at altitude in level flight, which is insane for the time, very powerful. There was also some durability tests, and they could run this engine at 3,600 horsepower for 250 hours without any failure, which is, once again, insane. A very, very efficient engine and a very, very powerful one. By this time of the war, the Americans were making some incredibly good, and sustainable, powerful engines. Now, where does this come into service? Well, in 1944, now this was during the testings of the engine with the P-47C, so we have the XP-47M. The start of the German, well, not really the start, but I suppose the ending of the German campaign of fear started. And what this campaign did was it birthed one of the most terrifying weapons of World War II, and these would be the V-1 flying bombs. Now, if you don't know what these are, pretty much the idea is they would just be set off from normally sites in France and fired at England the UK, mainly England, and the idea was you would land them in areas such as cities to create a lot of panic, a lot of fear, and this was done by a lot of explosions. It was also designed in a way so you wouldn't have to drop it over. Basically a very, 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 for the time, modernized massive rocket. So, with that said, the problem with the V1 that the British ran into was that it could fly at around speeds of 400 miles an hour. And this meant that it wasn't easy to intercept, and also a lot of the time when they were about to intercept it, it would have actually been worse to intercept it than just to let it go. Now, what I mean by this is if you're over an area of, the public area, and it's taken you this long to intercept the damn thing, and then you shoot it while it's about to hit the ground, you're going to do more damage over a larger area of effect, so that was a bit of an issue. Now, the British employed Tempest, Spitfires, and even the early Meteors to try and deal with the V1s, and they had some moderate success, but they basically put a call out to other nations being like, hey, do you have anything that could deal with this? And so what came along were the Americans with the XP-47M and also 3 YP-47Ms. These were ordered to be put into service, and they used existing P-47D-27RE fighters straight off the production line. So basically just put a new cool engine in it and made it very, very powerful. Now, with this said, after a bunch more testing, the P-47Ms finally got to Britain. The problem with this was that most of the V1 launch sites were already overrun by Allied ground forces, so they came a little bit too late. They were deployed to 3 squadrons of the 56 fighter group, and if you don't know who they are pretty much the fighter group that was stationed in Great Britain at the time, but we'll go into them in a little bit. So, even though this thing was designed specifically to intercept the V1, It was also used to, basically go after other fighters as well. I think generally, when we look at the P-47Ms, it's an incredible aircraft. It's shown in-game how incredible it is, but it never really showed its full potential. And I think one of the big reasons why this is because the P-47N exists, which was pretty much the long-range version of it. And at that point of the war, you're talking about 44, 45, the long-range fighter escort fighters are the ones which are prioritized to cover the bombers. So, yeah, the P-47Ms kind of got their own little area without them. So let's talk about the 56th Fighter Group. So who are they? Well, these are the lads in Britain who flew P-47s. And while they were stationed in England, I should say. So in England, these were your boys when it came to the P-47s. They were also known as the Wolf Pack, and they had more ace pilots than any other 8th Air Force fighter group. And the 56th Fighter Group also destroyed more enemy aircraft in air combat than any other. So this was an incredibly successful fighter group. American, born, and then were used in Britain. Now, how does this tie in to Lanovski? That's a great question. And by the way, all of the links that I've used here and all of the history that I've gathered, I will put in the description so you can read. So I went to the 56th Fighter Group official page, and it's actually a .co.uk page, which is kind of interesting. And on the front page, they have a book called Lanny Lanowski out in front. And I thought, so this guy existed. Lanovski exists. So I start having a look into him to see who he was. And he is an insane character. That's all I can say. And an insane in a good way. He is Polish. And what we'll do is go through it a little bit. So Lanny Lanowski is actually a guy called Vitold Lanny Lanowski. And this is Witold. And I'm not sure how you say it in Polish, but to me it's like Witold, right? So or Vitold. So Vitold Lanny Lanowski is a Polish pilot. Now, he has an interesting history, and I'm going to leave a link to a website called vitoldlanowski.com, and this is actually made by his son, Chris Lanowski, and he dedicated a whole website to his father and his escapades during World War II. Now, what is interesting about Lanowski is, after looking through his history, it seems like he never actually served for the Polish Air Force, and the reason for this was because of some political issues, and I'll go through it with you here. So, his flying career started when he was invited to attend a gliding course in 1934, and the bug bit. He qualified as top student and decided that this was what he wanted to be, a pilot. In 1935, he entered Dublin Officer Cadet School and graduated as first pilot in 1938. But whilst in the cadet school, he continued with his sports, including pentathlon, and became overall Polish ski champion in downhill, slalom, and cross-country, and also won the Polish shooting championships. He graduated from Dublin in 1938, and soon with some of the notable Polish pilots of the time, including Miroslav Ferik of the 303 Squadron, Tadeusz Sawicki, I think, Stanislaw Skalski, the CO of 317 Squadron, and Jan Zumbach of 303 Squadron. Witold's first posting as a pilot was to 121 Fighter Squadron in Krakow, and whilst there he continued his training for the World Ski Championships. In February 1939 he won the Inter-Services Championships. 1939 saw him posted back to Dublin Flight School as an instructor, where he was to teach some of the pilots who would be influential in his later career, namely Zbigniew Janicki, Tragius Anders, and Bolesław Gladych. September 1939 and the start of the Second World War. So all of this was before, the Second World War. Now we're going into his history at the start. So, following hostilities breaking out with the Germans, on the 13th of September 1939, he received orders to lead the remaining cadets out of the school south to Romania to escape internment. On the 19th of September, he was captured by the Czech militia and handed over to Ukrainian soldiers, but managed to escape from the convoy. Following a grueling journey through Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Hungary, they landed by boat at Marseille on the 12th of November 1939, where he was posted with other pilots to 145 Squadron at Villa Coublay, flying in defense of Lyon and Paris. It was here that Witold's reputation as a rebel escalated when the Polish pilots were displeased with the Polish authorities regarding the leadership of the Air Force, which was being commanded by army officers with absolutely no knowledge of air combat tactics or flying in general, and Witold aired his and the other pilots' views and was arrested by the Polish High Command and imprisoned for gross insubordination and for court-martial and possible execution. Vitold and other pilots had begun to realize earlier whilst in Dublin that all was not well in the Air Force Command and had organized the publication of a paper that was read by the other pilots highlighting the views of the pilots who became to be labeled rebels by the Polish High Command. So Vitold had already been on the watch list prior to this. Insubordination, which is Polish High Command terminology, and not the popular opinion of the pilots. So, with the capitulation of France and his escape from prison, he reboarded a boat at Marseille, docking at Liverpool on the 12th of July 1940. So you can see that he was an interesting figure at the start of the war. You know, he was an instructor, he played a lot of sports, he skied a lot and all of this, and when the war came about, he fought. He fought for his Polish guys, but the issue was he disagreed with how everything was being done, just like a lot of the pilots did. Now, he voiced it. Now, in a time of war, you can either agree or disagree with this, but generally this is a bad idea because it undermines the authorities that you're dealing with. Now, with that said, even if the authorities make the wrong decision, it's still something you have to go along with, and obviously he disagreed. But after, escaping from prison and everything like that, he was able to get to Britain, and from there, it seems like his reputation, the way I see it is, if he was wrong, right, in what he was saying in France, and if the pilots did disagree with him, there is no way he would be able to do what he did next. And what he was able to do, first of all, was become an instructor of the 55 OTU, and then after that, he was picked as a fighter pilot by the 308 Squadron Hurricanes in the 30th of December 1941, and then 317 Squadron with Spitfires. So there is no way that this guy did not have the support of the pilots around him, because this would have never happened. He would have never ever been put on these squadrons. So yeah, he flew with them from the 1940s to 44, and then in 1944 he joined Zemke's Wolf Pack. Now these guys were part of the 56th Fighter Squadron, and this is where he gets all of his accolades, basically. So the claimed kills that he has are 2 Focke-Wulf 190s and then 2 Me-109s. He also was able to become highly decorated for his services in World War II, and he survived it as well until the 90s. So Lanowski has a lot of history behind him, and he has a lot of interesting websites to go and have a look at, and even a book about him. And for me personally, I'm glad that this guy is being honoured in War Thunder, just because of the escapades he was able to do. He was able to stand up to power. He was able to stand up to power. He was able to survive, and then he was able to fight again for what he believed in. And for me, that is a powerful story. Now, for Polish Independence Day, I suppose I can kind of see it. The issue is the P-47. The P-47M that we have in game, the RE, is a complete copy of the one that we're getting. So basically, this is a reskin version of that, which is going to go in the American tech tree. alongside the P-47M. Now, my personal problem with this is it isn't something that the Polish are known for when it comes to fighting in World War II. What they are known for, at least from my history, are Hurricanes and Spitfires, especially the Hurricanes. I would have much preferred some kind of holiday celebration event, over the last, week or so. Do a bunch of challenges, get yourself a Polish Squadron Hurricane. I think that would have been much more powerful and much more rememberable instead of a premium, which is just a copy of one we already have. Yes, we already have Hurricanes in-game. We also have the P-47M in-game. So those two arguments, kind of cancel themselves out, and therefore we are left with what is the historical value. For me, a Hurricane with Polish insignias, flown by a Polish pilot in the Battle of Britain, would be much more powerful and much more rememberable when we look at the history stuff than a P-47, which I've had to dig for 2 hours to work out where it's from. I'm happy I did, though, because the story behind it is at least very, very interesting. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.